Lynn, welcome to Podcastina.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. Why is it that we get caught up with emotionally unavailable partners?
Well, everyone has their own unique story, but I think it's mostly because we're attracted to our unfinished business. So it's like whatever I'm looking for, either I grew up with a parent who was inconsistent and I'm used to chasing. I'm used to chasing after that feeling of belonging, feeling of love, feeling of being cared for. And like we do what's familiar. And so I think it's a perfect combo to find somebody who's emotionally unavailable. That chase feels exciting at first, and then it just kind of slips into that familiar comfort. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of what I see most often with my clients.
What are the tells that your partner would be labeled as emotionally unavailable?
So I think it's again, people have kind of different flavors of emotionally unavailable, where some people kind of do that like upfront. I do the sort of false vulnerability. So like I'm gonna dump a bunch of kind of like really intense stories, but they're very curated. They're very like I'm gonna be very specific about what personal details I give you so that you think that I'm being vulnerable. But then as we go along and there's more of that interpersonal vulnerability that has to come out, that's where like the pullback happens.
Mm.
So if you see like kind of that inconsistency of like sometimes you share a lot with me and then all of a sudden you're kind of disappeared and gone. Those are some red flags that are not as obvious. Um, then always like the silent treatment. So if things go wrong, do you just kind of see your partner like disappear for a while? Do they stop texting back? Are their words just like short and concise? Are they always agreeable? Um, so some of those pieces are what I always see as kind of those early red flags.
If a person is emotionally unavailable, do you think they're that way because they're with a person that they don't really intend to be with, or is that just an unshakable personality trait?
So I think it can be both. I think again, sometimes we like being chased. Like it's like I like the idea of someone sort of coming at me. I think other times, more often than not, my belief is it comes back to like attachment stuff. So if you are somebody who kind of has a disorganized attachment system where it's like closeness is something I really, really desire, but also terrifies the shit out of me, we kind of wall off, and sometimes it's hard to know, right? Am I being emotionally or is my partner being emotionally unavailable because they're being like intentionally manipulative, or are they in this other camp where it's like they don't even know that that's what they're doing? And I think it tends to be more that maybe I'm giving people more of a benefit of the doubt than they should get, but I kind of think of it as like we all have our protective moves that we do. And sometimes that's like closing off. And again, especially if you have somebody who's like, I'm going to drop that little bit of vulnerability here and there, um, we can kind of convince ourselves that we're being open and not really see sort of the ways that we're putting those walls up and being unavailable. But I also think all of this is changeable. Like if you recognize that this is something you do and you don't want to do it, you can change. You can't make your partner change if they're emotionally unavailable and you're like, I know why, I'll change you. Like that's where we get into problems.
Understandable, and I guess promising, like hopeful that someone can recognize it at least within themselves and then find a path forward. Everyone that works in attachment styles kind of, I've seen so many different working definitions of what are the attachment styles and what does that look like. Can you give me your categorization?
Yeah. Therapists love to like recategorize things and rename them, and it's all I don't know, we're a special breed. But so I always think about it as like secure, anxious, avoidant, and then disorganized. There's slight variations on the names, but those tend to resonate with most with me. So anxious tends to be people who are like, I'm going to fill, I can't have silences. I'm going to fill it. I'm going to pursue, or like I'm going to get angry, kind of controlling. That's kind of more the anxious. I also see anxious, especially with like eldest daughters and like a lot of women, where it's like I'm so attuned to how you feel that I only respond based on what I'm picking up from you. So like I know how to give you the right answer, or you're in a bad mood, so I'm going to respond this way. Like that's more of that anxious side. Avoidant is that emotional, unavailable person who's just kind of walled off. Again, maybe sprinkles in their stuff that they feel okay sharing, but then when push comes to shove, like goes back behind that wall as soon as distress hits. Disorganized is like the special flavor of all of the above, where again, you really want this closeness, but as soon as somebody gets close, your systems are like, ah, fuck, get away. Like I can't deal with that. So disorganized tends to be what I work with the most. And I always like to say, like, you have a little bit of everything, which means it's very complicated, but also you get to use what works for all these other patterns because like you have a little bit of everything. So a little bit of everything also works to help get you out of these patterns. So it's like my positive spin on disorganized attachment because it gets a bad rap.
That's the one I definitely know the least about. Is it just that you work with that one the most, or is that the most common within the population?
So it's one that like I end up just working really well with folks with disorganized attachment. Like I just kind of gravitate towards it. It depends on who you ask. Like when I was learning psych to begin with, it was if you had a disorganized attachment system, you came from like severe abuse and you would never attach to anyone. Like I remember being told, like, if you have disorganized attachment, like you just don't have relationships. You're basically a sociopath. And I was like, oh, okay. But actually, like more people have disorganized attachment because it's a mismatch, right? What I expect my caregiver to give me doesn't match up with what's happening. So either they're on the surface saying really happy things, but I know that underneath that they're angry. Or I know that tomorrow they'll be drunk and they won't show up for me, right? That inconsistency piece. Um, and so a lot more people, I think, fall into that disorganized attachment system than we believe, because I think we labeled it in this very harsh, kind of damning way that's not actually accurate. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's my 2 cents on it.
Are you running into a lot of securely attached people, or how common is that one?
I mean, I don't really see it because people who are securely attached, tend to not come to therapy. I do see that with like a lot of my folks who come in who um, are on like their second long-term relationship or their second or third marriages, where it's like, okay, we know what we've done wrong in the past. We're trying to do this differently, so we're going to preemptively go into therapy and kind of address some of this stuff. So I do see folks in that bucket. And they usually also are the ones with disorganized attachment systems, like originally, because again, they're like, oh, okay, I can work through some of this stuff. And now that I know that, I want to do this relationship differently. But because of what I do, I don't tend to see as many securely attached people.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. They're probably working things out or not having as many communication issues that aren't leading to as many problems that would land them in your office.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there tools that you go to if someone's trying to change their attachment style? Number one, can it be changed? Number two, what are the types of tools they should implement if they're like, oh my God, I'm so anxious. I know about it. Is there recovery?
Yeah. I think there's, again, I think we gave people the message that it's like this very rigid, like, and people, as we like talk about it more and it's more common in social media, like people are talking about, so now there's like this over identification, like I'm a disorganized attached person, so I'm always going to be this way. And it's like, yeah, it's really helpful to have a name to like understand what you experience, but also like these are very fluid things. So Jessica Fern wrote a book called Polysecure that talks about how you can have different attachment styles in different relationships. The book was written for like polyamorous relationships, but like really interesting on like just how flexible our attachment systems are. So I think depending on what your system is going to sort of dictate what tool works best for you. Like if you are a very walled off person, setting boundaries on your time and energy is probably going to be relatively easy, but giving feedback when it's hard is going to be a lot more challenging. So kind of knowing like, okay, my system tends to do this. If I'm anxiously attached, taking a break is going to be really, really freaking hard for me. So how do I sort of help myself self-regulate? What do I need to like understand myself. I what I've seen is like that inner child work is really kind of crucial, especially with these like older attachment systems. So understanding, where did this come from? Like, we all do the things that we do in relationships because it served us at some point. So like, how do I go back, understand what that served, so that I can like now rewrite what I want to do in this relationship where it's healthier. So any sort of inner child work. um, I use a model called RLT. So we look at like, what are your relational patterns on your worst day? What is your MO in relationships when you're pissed off at your person? And how do you take care of that part of you that wants to jump in and protect you from, it's the perception of danger? And how do you get back to kind of your wise adult and interact from that place instead? So I think there's a million tools out there. It's just kind of finding what flavor kind of fits your needs.
I've definitely heard of inner child work a lot, but just I guess for clarity, what does that look like if that's the avenue someone takes?
Yeah, so there's different ways of approaching it. You can do it really like narrative, kind of like writing stories. You can do it really experiential, where you're like literally feeling into your body. Um, Again, therapists are very opinionated, so we all have like, this is the only way to do it, but there's a lot. But essentially, it's looking at like, all of us have, you know, usually like a 5-year-old version of us. Like when we were 5, we started to realize that we are not just connected to our caregivers, there's a world outside. And if we had a secure attachment, then we learned that we can go out into the world, we can be safe, and then we can come back to our secure base and everything will be good. I can fall down, I can get hurt, but like somebody will always kind of have my back. Again, I don't really see most of those people. So what I see instead is my caregivers were inconsistent, were completely absent. I was taking care of myself, or my caregivers were scary and harmful to me. So I had to actually protect myself against that. So we go back and say, okay, yeah, when you were 5, you needed to have that wall because you had very intrusive parents, or they were, inconsistent. You realized you had to figure this out on your own. Otherwise, you weren't going to survive. Like, you're not going to survive if you don't have somewhere to. So we go and we look at like, okay, what do you wish would have happened instead for that younger part of you? You can't go back in time and like rewrite history, but we can start to like recognize when that part comes back up and kind of figure out, what do you want to do? So I do a lot of imaginary work with my clients. Again, disorganized, attached folks tend to work really well with like imaginary land. So we talk about like, what do you want to bring in? Imagine this 5-year-old and like, where do they want to go play? Like, I have a client who he made a cave and like he had a dragon and his 5-year-old. So anytime he got activated and he wanted to just like run away from his wife, he'd be like, okay, I'm just going to imagine the dragon protecting me. And like, I don't need to have him jump in and close off from my wife. So we do a bunch of stuff like that. But it's really just understanding like, where is that core hurt coming from? And like, how can we now take care of that part of you that still kind of exists? And then we usually have like a teenage version that's like angsty and rebellious and wants to just like rebel against everything that's offered.
What is discernment counseling? Because I know that's something you work in. I've never heard about it before.
Yeah. So it's we're a smaller group, but like slowly and happily expanding. So discernment is working with couples who have ambivalence about staying together. They're not sure if they want to do couples therapy. They're not sure if they want to stay together. So what typically happens is they go and see a couples therapist, or they see a divorce lawyer. And we try to do couples therapy and we're trying to work on all this stuff, but they're like, I don't really know. So not surprisingly, everyone's frustrated. They don't go anywhere. So discernment um, sort of breaks that up. So we do 5 sessions or less. They're longer sessions. We just ask the question, what do you need to know in order to get clarity on what your best next move is? So it's, we stay exactly as we are, nothing changes. We're going to get divorced or separated, or we're going to commit to like 6 months of therapy and really like address these issues. And you use that time to identify like, here are my things that I do. Here's my MO in a fight. Here's my attachment stuff that comes up. And you write down this sort of agenda for change of like, if we were to move forward, here's all the things that I would need to change. Here's what I would like to see different. Or if we're moving to divorce and separation and co-parenting, how do we do that successfully? We're not trying to work on any of that stuff. We're just really asking that question, like, can I find clarity for myself on what I want to do next? And then how do we make that transition as successful as possible? I say, like, after discernment, you're not going back to the relationship. You're like moving forward, even if you're staying as is, you're going to have a little bit more clarity on like how to do that successfully. So it's been a really cool modality to work with.
Yeah, it's nice. How hands-on are you with like helping people make that decision? Do you ever see such glaring red flags that you're kind of forced to advise people to separate?
Yeah, I'm pretty. I like both of these modalities, RLT and discernment, because they're pretty concrete. They're really like, we're gonna call the things that we see, and then it's up to you to do whatever you want with it. But it's not the like, just sit back and tell me how you feel, and I'm just gonna reflect back what I hear. Like, I'm gonna say, hey, you keep doing this thing, and it's really hurtful and harmful to your partner. I can't sit every week and just buffer you hurting them and then
Mhm.
ask them to be vulnerable with you. Like, that's not going to be helpful. And so I always tell people that up front, like, if you're coming in and I'm seeing something, I'm going to say it. And I'm also going to call if couples therapy is going, is actually adding more harm to your system. So I
Mm.
get a lot of people who come in after some sort of physical, like things have hit a physical thing where they've like someone's broken something, they're yelling and screaming at each other. So I'm very upfront with like, I'm not just going to be the band-aid of the week. Um, that's actually really hurtful and harmful. Couples therapies can be actually really harmful to couples in unsafe situations. So I'm pretty direct and confrontational about that piece. And I've seen a lot of people respond well to that because they feel more open, like talking about what has gone wrong and like the reality of what their fights actually look like. And then I'm able to say, like, okay, here's, as long as we're working on it, we can really change anything. You just have to be on board for it. So I'm hands on and like, I'm very direct and I'll call it as I see it. But then I'm very much like, and this isn't my relationship. Like, at the end of this hour, I'm going to close my computer and, go hang out with my snoring dog. And you're left with your relationship. So it's up to you what you want to do with that information.
Wow, I'm really just kind of sitting with like the gravity of that because that sounds really valuable. And I'd never considered that couples therapy could be harmful before. Like, what does it look like when it's kind of putting more pressure on a relationship?
Yeah, well, it happens in a couple ways where you get somebody who is, really grandiose, really kind of closed off. They're like, I don't understand what the big deal is. And the partner's saying, you say this hurtful thing to me, you do this hurtful thing, and then you dismiss me and tell me that I'm making too big of a deal over it. Like, this is like the very common thing that I see. And so, not uncommon, but where it gets harmful is if I'm like, okay, do you see how you're hurting them? And they're really hurt in this way. And then I'm like, what you should be saying is, I validate what your experience, and I hear that you're feeling hurt by what I said. And now they'll take that same language, but they'll use it to continue to do the same pattern. So it's like,
Mm.
I understand that you think that you're hurt by me, and that's the story in your head, but that's not really what happened. And it's like, okay, like now therapy is just becoming like kind of weaponized. The other thing is people will just save up all of this stuff until our weekly session and just kind of like throw it out there and be like, okay, now referee us. And it's like, sometimes that's totally fine, but it creates this pattern where it's like, okay, but if I'm not in therapy, I don't actually have any tools to deal with the big whoosh that's going to happen when I get pissed off at my partner or I get triggered by something. And so that's also kind of a sneaky way that couples therapy can be harmful. And it could be really severe and it could be really minor, but it's definitely something that I try to like train my interns on and work with people on.
Wow. I wanted to ask, like, what's the difference sometimes we can like interpret something as a red flag, but maybe it's really our trauma response and it's not a legitimate red flag. Is there a way to call that? Like, how do you know if you're overreacting to something?
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing. I work with so many people on this who are like, I had these terribly toxic relationships. So now if my partner does something that feels dismissive, it's like waving this big giant red flag. And like, I know it's not totally accurate. So I was like, don't take anything like just in a bubble. You have to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger context. Is this part of a bigger pattern? Is this a one-off thing? If I know I have a sensitivity around things, sort of knowing like, okay, my level for this, I'm always going to feel more hurt by this than this other thing. It's like, okay, use that, like understand where your scale is and be like, okay, again, is this a repetitive thing? If I ask my person to address this red flag, are they responsive? They might not do it perfectly, but like, do they care that what they're doing is bothering me or upsetting me? Okay, then that's fine. It's like if I'm seeing this red flag, it's part of a bigger pattern. I know that I tend to gaslight myself into pretending like everything's fine and I can just make do. Then like you want to read a little bit more into those red flags, maybe, and make a little bit more. So it's kind of knowing where you're coming from when you're looking at that red flag kind of helps determine, is this just, my own shit coming up here, or is this actually a red flag that something's like going wrong in this relationship, or this person isn't the right person for me.
Once all of that is kind of ironed out, and maybe the couple does decide that it's over, there's no saving it, it's safer for both people to go their separate ways, what's going on with us from like a neuroscience lens when we go through a breakup?
Yeah, so Guy Winch has some really great studies on this, and he equates it to it's similar to going through withdrawals from like cocaine. Like when you're losing that connection with somebody, right? It's hitting all of your old attachment stuff. So I'm losing my person, but now I'm also kicking into maybe those negative core beliefs, like I'm never going to be lovable, I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm, if only I had this, then they would stay. So it starts to feed into those old things. So that starts to open all of our neural pathways from like all of our old hurts. And then our brain can't differentiate between like past and present. That's why like everything feels so heavy all at once. And then any sort of like reminder of that relationship, he was equating it to like seeing cocaine again. If you're trying to go through recovery and you see cocaine, you're like, oh, all my brain parts light up. It's the same thing when we go through a breakup. And so kind of treating it as such that like your brain's really gonna get activated for the first little bit. You're gonna hit on all of these old hurts from the past. So like really take that slow during that time. Know that some of this will pass and really get some support to weed out like what's coming from here and what's coming from the past. I think there's also, I think people are starting to talk about like limerence more and more, where it's like I become obsessed with somebody and it's the obsession of that thing. It's like also noticing if you're starting to get fixated on like the person that you thought your partner could be and like getting stuck on that and just kind of spinning out there. So sometimes there's like a little bit of, you get kind of addicted to the cycle of being heartbroken almost, and then like that becomes its own cycle in your brain to get like swirling around.
Aside from the reality of people who maybe have to like split custody and so they have to stay in communications, do you make the recommendation that people disconnect from their ex, like go no contact, block them on social media? What are your thoughts on that?
I hate doing the therapist answer of like it depends, but it depends. Like I think it's, I think there's plenty of exes that have really great relationships. I think that we kind of tend to say like don't ever do it, it's going to be terrible, but like I don't know, that's not always the case. I do think that you need some sort of chunk of time though to separate out like the relationship to like our new relationship, just because like it's hard to go from like I sleep with you, I spend every day with you, I talk all day, and now all of a sudden we're friends and we're going to talk like we're friends and I want to hear about like the new person you're with. Like, have some realistic um, little gaps. But I've done a couple of things with people where they really wanted to go no contact. They're like, we know that if we don't, we're just going to slip back into our old relate. Like it's just impossible for us to like stay apart if we have contact. But they didn't want to like go forever without seeing each other. So they were like, I forget what the time frame was, but I think it was like a year. They're like, in a year, we're going to travel to this place and we're going to see each other. And that's going to be our check-in point for like a lunch. They had like already kind of planned it out. And so I thought that was like a really sweet way of doing it, where they're like, I do eventually want to be friends with you, and I know that I definitely 100% can't do that right now. So I like something like that where it's like, okay, if we really want to be friends, let's give it like a couple of months and then we'll kind of test the waters and see how we do.
That's a very reasonable way to handle it. I like that a lot.
Yeah, doesn't happen with every breakup, but in
Mhm.
an ideal situation, it's great.
As far as the limerence piece of it, is there a certain type of person that's kind of more prone to experiencing limerence, and what tools can they reach for to try to break that pattern?
Yeah, it can kind of hit if I'm looking at it through that attachment lens, like it can kind of hit on all the anything other than secure attachment. So, if I tend to be an anxious person, am I trying to fix it? Like, okay, you're not trying to fix that person, you're trying to fix something in you. So, like, what is it that you're actually trying to fix? If I'm more of an avoidant person, and this is a way for me to continue to like kind of stay walled off to the potential of moving on, then I'm going to want to address that part. If I'm disorganized, I have a fear, right? I'm chasing the thing that I know I'm never going to get because then I get the closeness and distance that feels familiar. So I think it's like always recognizing what about this is familiar. And then also if there's any kind of neurodivergent stuff going on for you. So if you're
Mm.
ADD, if you have OCD, if you know that that's a pattern for you, it's really common to get fixated on a relationship or a person. So really kind of looking for specific supports around that, if that's the case for you, to like address the thought patterns that are keeping that swirl going, and then probably also kicking into some attachment stuff.
I'm digesting that because I've experienced it before, and it's kind of part of this. Like, I don't want to be a internet self care person, even though that's what this show is. But I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I do have ADHD.
I know, I know. I
Who
feel
among
like
us doesn't?
every, yeah, it's fun.
So I saw a thing that it's like 60% of people, according to a research from 2024, are meeting online these days. And I wanted to talk about how that modern dating is kind of like, how is that impacting our ability to make connections, keep connections? Like, I would love to get your POV on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there's like two sides of the coin. Like you kind of have more options. I work with like a lot of queer folks, so it's like, oh, okay, I can connect with people that maybe like, especially if I'm in a small area, I can kind of have a larger reach and maybe meet people who align more with me that I'm not going to find at like the local bar. But I think for the most part, it's like, I don't know, it kind of makes everything very like um dismissive or like very temporary. Like, okay, this isn't working with you. I can just kind of move on and see the next person. And because I've access to all these people, it feels like there's always like something better out there. So when I'm chasing the carrot, which we all feel, most of us feel very rewarded in doing, and then it's also like, oh, as soon as I hit a bump in the road with this person, I don't really have a lot of reason to keep working on it and keep understanding maybe what's in me that's causing this issue to happen. Um, so I think it is hurting our like relational skills that like we don't give it enough time. Whereas like before, it's like you've got three options. Like you're gonna make it work. You're gonna deal with some stuff and have to learn how to manage it. We don't really have that as much. It's much more, we're much quicker to like divorce, separate, just kind of move on to the next person, feeling like there's always something out there. And then we're always comparing ourselves to other people. And again, you're seeing this like little snapshot of somebody putting their best foot forward. And then it kind of gives you this false reality that you're living on. Like, what's wrong with me that I don't have this? Or this person must have a great life. I think there's a lot of components that just create this like false reality that is hard and like is making all of us a little bit like less skilled relationally.
That's how it feels. It feels like the paradox of choice, as they call it, is people just are so dismissive. And I wonder, and I'm just like throwing a theory out, but is this kind of paradox of choice hindering people's ability to have these deep connections, like really real long-term relationships. Because I'm hearing just, of course, this is like anecdotal, but within my own friend groups, people are having a much harder time finding long-term relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a lot of components in there. I think, you know, I think people are having kids later. A lot of people are choosing not to have kids, which is a great decision. But it also like sets this time, like before it was like, okay, you have to, hurry up and get married so then you can have kids and then you can do this. And, if you're a woman, you don't need a career. It's fine. But it gave a timeline and a kind of a push. So I don't think that that's a good thing, but it did give that push that I feel like now it's like, oh, I want to spend this time focusing on my career. And like, I'm not worried about a biological clock. So I don't really care if I find a partner. Again, all good things, but it also leaves this huge choice like out there. And then I think you add in that like the grass is always greener and I'm always going to be chasing the next person. And if it doesn't work out, I can just put them to the side and like go try something else. So I do think it makes yeah, it's all just complicated.
I think I accidentally fell for some rage bait online yesterday. I saw a clip of, I saw a man saying, and he's a comedian, so he has absolutely no room to speak on what women want. But I guess so am
Right.
I. So who knows? Maybe I'm like putting my foot in my mouth right now. But what he was saying was that women are more afraid of being alone than being with the wrong person, and that it's the inverse with men. And I'm like thinking to myself, hearing this, I'm going, no, I think it's the opposite. I think that's why we end up with, because no one's saying we have a female loneliness epidemic, right? They're saying we have a male loneliness epidemic. So I would love to know, like, I would just love to talk about the patriarchy and the way that people are coming to these conclusions and women are staying single longer these days. Like, how's that playing out? Like, how have you seen that contribute to dating?
Yeah, it's interesting because like I tend to see a lot of people who are sort of like at the tail end of their marriages. Either they think it is or it actually is. And you do see much more women being like, I've got the financial stability. Like, I actually don't need to follow down the path that I've been told I have to follow down. And I have a community of other women. Like, that's not to be over genderized, but like, usually women are like, I have other moms. I know other single moms, or I have friends. Like, I'm happy to have multiple partners. Again, more women are choosing to focus on their career, not have kids, and so it's like, oh, maybe I don't need to fit in the box of marrying one man for the rest of my life and then sticking to it. Um, so yeah, I see less women being afraid of being on their own. I think it's the fear. I think previously was that fear of like the financial stability. Like that's where I still see that gap. Whereas like I don't have a lot of male clients who are like, I'm worried about being financially stable if my wife leaves me. I do see that with women, but as that's becoming less commonplace, yeah, I'm certainly seeing women be like, I don't want to give up. I don't want to be in the marriages of my parents' generation where everyone just kind of like suck it up and dealt with it and we're miserable together. And so I think they're much more likely to make that choice to be like, I have a community. I'm happy to build that community. I don't need just one partner. And I don't think men are conditioned. I don't think they have a lot of skills relationally because they're not, you know, some men are actively trying not to do that, but also they're not conditioned to do that. They're conditioned to like go out and win, base your worth on achievement, how much you can make, what you can provide for other people. They're not conditioned as much as like, how do you be relational? How do you take accountability? How do you do these like relational skills? So they're ending up with women who are like, I don't actually need you. And oh shit, I have no friends because like I don't actually know how to be with other men relationally outside of like work or some sort of like sport or something like that.
Do you see more resistance to therapy within men?
I think there's still much more of a stigma for men to go to therapy. It's funny, over the last couple of years, I've ended up working with a lot of, I started with a couple and now I've kind of branched out. I end up having a lot of the male components of my couples work with me individually to address some of their like childhood trauma and this piece of like what do you mean I can't just provide and like shut down at the end of the night? Like, I'm not abusive. I'm not like my parents. I'm not doing these things. It's like, yes, you're also not being relational though. Like, and your wife wants you to talk to her, and like that's scary for you for these reasons. So there is a big shift, and I am seeing more men talk to other men about going to therapy, which I think has been really cool. Um, there's an episode of like Survival of the Thickest where there's a guy talking about going to therapy. He finally opens up to his friends, and they're all like, "Yeah, dude, I've been in therapy for like years." And one guy's like, "I'm literally a therapist," and he's like, "Oh shit, we never talked about it." I do feel like there's that going on where like a lot of men actually are in therapy, but like they're not talking to each other about it because there's still that stigma. So it's interesting to kind of see that shift happening.
I know it's exciting to see that shift happening, and I hope that it kind of goes and overcorrects the opposite end of the spectrum, which is this red pill nonsense that's going on, and how scary that has been to sit back and witness.
Yeah. And I'm hoping, okay, wishful thinking maybe, but like it's sort of that behavior extinction where it's like I see this slipping away. I see the way that I've been used to being changing so drastically. Like I just have to kind of do this big crazy thing, and hopefully that's sort of like the burst before the behavior actually stops. But that's my hope.
I like that. I've never heard the term behavior extinction before.
Yeah, it comes from behavior psychology. And I heard it from a guy on TikTok, and I don't remember his name, but he was talking about it when about this in particular, which I was like, oh, I like that thought. I want that theory to be right.
Yeah, I do too. And I don't know that those types of men who are that far gone down the red pill community would ever listen to a woman on a podcast speaking to another woman. So I'm probably not the correct mouthpiece to be trying to send the message. But do you see, are there like a lot of male therapists, or is it like predominantly women?
It is predominantly women. There is, again, there's many more men coming into the field than there were before. Um, uh, and yeah, and there's a big push in like the Black community where like there's a lot of Black male therapists that are really trying to like make a move to be like, here's how we can present therapy different and like not harmful. So it is cool to see, but it's definitely a small group of men, and women are definitely more predominant still.
Do you see any difference in how women versus men handle breakups?
That's a good question. I think I feel like again, gross generalization, but I feel like men tend to struggle a little bit more. Again, because I think they're not right. Like you can be angry, you can be lustful. Those are kind of your feelings that you're allowed to express. Feeling sad, feeling heartbroken, I think kicks on that like um, male ego thing where it's like, what's wrong with me? Or why am I not enough? Let me go do more to be enough so that I can prove that I'm worthwhile. So I think that breakups tend to like rock their identity a little bit more, whereas I see more of my women clients like grieving and going through that process, but they're a little bit more focused on like how am I going to build my next chapter? Whereas I feel like men, I see more in that like shit, who am I now? Or like what's wrong with me? So that's been an interesting shift that I don't know would have been true like 10 years ago. So
Yeah, definitely. Um, how does fight, flight, and fawn, how does that play into our conflicts within relationships?
yeah, huge. It's like a huge factor. So we all like again tend to have a favorite. Um and yeah, I get like if I freeze, I'm gonna need a very different tool than if I wanna like move in and fight. So again, knowledge about ourselves is gonna take us really far. In RLT, we also talk about there's a relationship grid. So you can be boundaryless on one side and, or sorry, walled off on one side, boundaryless on the other. And you can go one up and be grandiose, or you can go one down and go into shame. And so it fits, again, it's another way of saying the same thing that fight and flawn do, but sort of knowing like, okay, what do I tend to do? Do I tend to kind of shut off, and then do I feel terrible about myself, or do I shut off and I'm like, oh, screw you, I don't need you, I'm going to do this thing? knowing what our defense mechanism to danger is always comes out in our conflict cycles with people. Whatever I do when I'm feeling most threatened, I'm feeling most vulnerable, I'm feeling rejected, like that response is gonna show up. So again, if I know I tend to fight when I'm under distress, that's probably what I'm going to go to in my relationship. If I tend to shut down, I'm probably going to like wall off, get quiet, or I'm going to try to peacekeep and make everyone feel better.
And where do those come from? I mean, obviously childhood, but what kinds of household dynamics are most likely to cause those types of responses?
Yeah, I see it. I don't know that there's always a correlation between like abusive parents tend to have children who fawn. It's usually like a combination of like gender, age, like which order you are in the, if there's multiple children, like the oldest child tends to have different patterns. But I see it a lot. I mean, the obvious one is like abusive parents, where they're physically abusive. The ones that happen a lot that people kind of get um, swept under the rug are like when there's addiction or mental health, where it's like, oh, my parents weren't abusive, but also sometimes they would forget to feed us because they were too drunk at night. Or um, they went through periods of depression where I would talk to them and I would just get this blank response. Something I see a lot that's super distressing to little kids. And so you get usually a fawning response, but not always. Um, but people don't always identify that as like abusive behavior because it's not abusive, but it's still also not relational. It's not caretaking. You're not taking on that caretaker role when you're giving somebody a blank response. Doesn't mean you're a terrible parent. Like there may be plenty of valid reasons why that happened, but it's still going to give you a response system that is not relational. So most things are traced back to that, or they're based in like how society treats you. So if I'm a kid with a learning disability and I went to school where I was made fun of every day, like I'm going to learn some way to respond against that. If I'm facing racism or I can't come out because of the community I am, whatever reason, like if my identity is being oppressed, then like I'm also going to develop some sort of protective system around that. And so I think depending on what your style is, kind of determines like, do I become smaller? Do I hit them before they hit me? Or do I try to make everyone happy so that I have a place to belong in the group?
And once you kind of identify, oh, let's say I know I'm fight and I feel a confrontation coming within the relationship, like what do you advise people to do to, I mean, obviously put space in between them and their partner so they don't actually have a physical altercation, but is there like a guidebook for how to pump the brakes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's knowing like if I go to activation, breaks are going to be really, really hard. So figuring out like, do I have a safe word essentially? Like, can my partner say something that's like super neutral so it doesn't activate me more, so it can cue me into this? And then I go to like, again, the imaginary stuff. So I had a client who really struggled with anger, like when she got angry, like all the anger from the past came up and she was a good fighter. So she's like, I will literally see red. So I'm like, okay, what do you see before you see the red? So we had like a color coded system where she's like, okay, if I see orange, it means I need to get the hell out of the house because I'm gonna blow up at somebody. And then we kind of broke it down further. Okay, when it's blue or it's green, I'm gonna do A, B, and C. So tracking like within yourself what happens before you hit that blow up moment. It might be like a split second, but if you can catch yourself in that split second, you're gonna be much more effective. Um, and then coldness is usually my go-to with anger to try out. So getting a cold ice cube, splashing yourself with cold water. This client who saw red, she's like, I would take a full on like ice bath. Like I would just sit in the freezing water until I could breathe again and see straight, and then I would be fine. And she did that a couple times, and she's like, now I can recognize it much sooner. I don't really need to do that anymore. That ice will turn on your dive response. So it causes everything to slow down. Your heart rate slows down. It just like kind of shocks your body into forcing it to slow itself down. So that one tends to be really effective with anger. And then there's some other like pushing against a wall so that you kind of have that physical like release. A lot of physical things tend to be helpful. not punching things, because we used to tell people to punch things and that makes them more violent. So don't do that.
I really like the cold application. That's so practical.
Yeah. Even just an ice cube can be like huge. So I tell everyone, like, if you're going to talk to your partner and there's even a slight chance it's going to go off the rails, just grab a glass of ice water and
Wow,
hold on to it when you're getting upset.
that's so practical. Do you suggest people meditate, or what's your relationship to meditation and offering that?
Yeah, I personally really struggle with like the slow, deep meditation. And for a long time, I was like, I want to do that. I'm going to get into it. But I realized it's just not for me. Like I just trying to slow down, but I love like Yogi, what's his name? Yogi Brian, who's like, calm the fuck down, da, 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 like very short, very funny. I'm like, okay, I can get on board with that. And then I found like walking meditations or more active mindfulness practices. And that really worked for me, for my brain, for my own attachment system. And a lot of my clients really struggled with that, especially disorganized folks. Like slowing down and being present with your thoughts and your body is like really, really overwhelming and scary. And so when you sit down to meditate, it would like activate people. They would get flooded, they would kind of freak out, and then everyone's like, just meditate more, meditate more. And it's like, oh, actually, I'm just re-traumatizing myself over and over again. So the mindfulness tended to be a little bit better. So that's what I gravitate towards. I teach it to my clients too, because again, it's like what works for me. I'm not as good at like doing the slow, deep, quiet meditation, but I think it does really work for people that it works for. I just tend to get people who it doesn't work for.
What's been the most extreme case that you've seen in your practice that actually, like, the relationship was saved after they came in and tried to do the therapy?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I don't know. I have so many clients who've come from like such extreme trauma. And when they came in the door, were like, my childhood was fine. And I'm like, oh, okay. Why can't you talk to your person at the end of the day? And they're like, I don't know. Like 6 months in, it's like, oh, well, that one time when I was 5 and I had to like, walk myself home in the middle of New York City because my dad got drunk and lost. And I'm like, do you think maybe that's a little bit why you're a little over self-reliant? No. Okay. So, again, I see a lot of like men that are coming in now and are realizing like, oh, okay, maybe the stuff from the past is impacting me. Yeah, I'm thinking of one client where they were really like on the brink. She was ready to walk. He was like, what do you mean something's wrong? And she's like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like, I've been telling you this for years. And she was like, he had like no clue, but really like clearly cared for her. And they did about a year of work, were doing really well, and then hit that same spot, like kind of walked away from therapy, got back to the same spot. She's like, I'm going to leave. What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, how are you not seeing we're in the same spot? Um, so I did some one work with them. And then they just had their second kid like 6 months ago. So they're doing really well, and they're both telling me how great they're doing, and they haven't fallen back into their old patterns. So those are some really sweet cases.
That's awesome. That's hopeful that they can model newly found relational skills for the kids.
Yeah. I have an individual client who's separated, but just came in just so like literally like shaking. Like our first few sessions was like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And it was one of those situations where I'm like, your partner isn't able to see their part in this. And they finally took some space, and now they have like this beautiful community around them. They're like, I feel so confident about myself, not because I'm perfect, I still make mistakes, but like I'm not feeling like an idiot. I don't hate myself all day long. And I'm in my 50s and I've never felt that way before. So I think sometimes, even though that relationship ended, it was like, this was a good move. This was a good move for your family. This was a good move for you, and probably for your partner too. So yeah, I've seen some people do some amazing stuff. It's really cool.
To wrap it up on a positive, do you have any favorite relationship advice that you give people?
I have a lot of opinions. I think the most is like trying to find what your authentic self is and like how can you bring that into your relationships in a way that values your other person equally. Like you're both flawed, you both have your own shit, and you're both equal in that. Like staying on that same level, not going one up or one down, is really challenging. But like if you make that the focal point, that's where I've seen people be the most successful. Like, how do I stay on the same playing field as you? Like, no better, no worse. Which sounds really easy, but it's not.
Lyn Martin, if people want to learn more about what you do, if they want to work with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, so our practice is called Attached NY. You can check us out at attachedny.com, or on Instagram at Attached Therapy.
Amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks. It was great. Thank you so much.
Of course, and thank you everybody for listening. Bye.